people do, without thinking, they go straight into this dissertation about what they think happened. Well, a policeman will say, well, where was this guy when you first saw him? They'll say things like, well, I didn't see him.
Motoring 91 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.
Not bad, and it's for sale too. How you doing? Welcome to Motoring. You know, the other day a gentleman called Bob Sparks gave us a call and said, come on over to my house. I've got a car in the driveway I want you to see. A car? Here's one, but look over here. He's got a driveway full of cars, and apparently, Bob says, he's got 40 more out back, and they all have something in common. What's it all about? Well, we'll find out later, but first, you may remember last week's program. We were out on the highways patrolling with the police with their radar gun. Well, what happens when you get caught speeding? Well, this week, Steve Grant has a story about some former policemen who are now making a point out of pleading your case in court.
Good afternoon, Points.
Provincial Offences Information and Traffic Ticket Service. That's what POINT stands for. Fighting traffic tickets is their specialty.
Okay, with speeding, did you say? 120 and a 100?
But I guess that the idea sort of grew on me in the 15 years I was on the police force. There was, when I attended traffic court, there was always a lot of people there trying to defend their traffic tickets. Most of them didn't have a lawyer, and I mean 99.9% didn't have a lawyer, and the reason for that was that they thought that the cost for a lawyer was prohibitive for such a minor thing as they thought. So they would come into court, and the defences that they would put forward were basically, I didn't do it, or I didn't mean it. Well, of course, without anything else to back it up, that didn't really carry too much weight in traffic court, and they were convicted. As a policeman, when I sat there, I could see the basis of a defence that they had, but they just weren't able. They didn't know the procedure. They were perhaps intimidated by the courtroom setting. They weren't able to put their case forward. And I thought to myself, well, if I've been trained by the Attorney General to prosecute these people, then I must, using the same skills, be able to defend them.
So Brian Laurie hung up his uniform and began working out of his basement in May of 1984. Well, since then, Points has spread into 3 provinces with 47 agents working out of 35 offices. And almost all of the agents are former cops.
Most people, when they look at a policeman, they see a uniform with a man in it. Having worn a uniform for the extended period of time that we have, 15 years in my case, we just see the man. And in that case, our approach to him is different, and invariably his response is different, and the citizen gets the advantage of that.
Just about the only traffic offense Points won't touch is impaired or drinking and driving. But by far the most common beef they take on is speeding.
The radar itself, the actual electronic mechanical device of radar, is an extremely accurate device. It'll tell you that an object is traveling at precisely 115 kilometers per hour. Police officer knows it's a 100 kilometer per hour zone. What the radar set does not tell you is which object was traveling at 115 kilometers per hour. Radar is, without a doubt, one of the most boring jobs you can ever give a policeman. And of course, once a person gets bored, he gets sort of careless, you should say. And it's really, I mean, a police officer is given a radar set and he's sent out there for 8 hours to do nothing but speed enforcement. And of course, working radar, it's a lot like working in a complaint department of a large store. I mean, you never meet a smiling face. I always get something bad to say about something, right? And some complaint to make. And the police officer himself, of course, it becomes a rote for him, particularly if he's doing it day in and day out. And this is where the mistakes are made. And obviously there are mistakes just simply by the volume of complaints from the citizens.
10 or 15 years ago, people with traffic tickets very rarely bothered to hire someone to go to court, because if you lost, you paid a fine, you maybe lost a few points, and it wasn't that important. Today, the punishment comes from insurance companies more than it does from the law. You could have...
Well, we work our fees on a flat rate basis that we charge in the vicinity of, I mean, the maximum that we would charge for, say, an offence like a speeding ticket or a stop sign would be $375. Now, for the maximum we would charge for an offence such as which involved an accident or a fail to remain or a driving under suspension, it would be $550. Of course, all the officers are free to charge whatever prices they choose, as long as it's below that price.
But for now, some free advice, especially if you're ever involved in an accident.
The policeman will say, well, where was this guy when you first saw him? They'll say things like, well, I didn't see him. Well, of course, when you say I didn't see him, that sort of basically implies to the police officer you weren't paying attention. What you actually mean to say to the police officer is, well, by the time I saw him, it was too late to avoid him because he came out in front of me so fast, or that type of thing. 3 months later, in the cold, stark light of a courtroom, this gets the defendant or the accused at that particular time said to me, when I asked him where was the vehicle when I first saw him, he said he didn't see him. Well, everybody in the court thinks, well, the guy was driving along asleep. Whereas that wasn't the case. So be careful what you say to the policeman at the time.
While the Paseo is based on the Tercel, it was developed as a parallel project. As such, the Paseo does not share any exterior body panels, and only the interior design gives away the Tercel influence.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This is the 1992 Toyota Paseo, a car literally hot off the assembly line. Now with this vehicle, Toyota are obviously hoping to cash in on the growing popularity of two-door sports cars. The Paseo is the third all-new Toyota nameplate to appear in the past 15 months. First came the Previa minivan, then the luxurious Lexus lineup. Incidentally, next week on Test Drive, we will be looking at the latest Lexus, the SC400. While the Paseo is based on the Tercel, it was developed as a parallel project. As such, the Paseo does not share any exterior body panels, and only the interior design gives away the Tercel influence, the instrument panel in particular. The binnacle that houses the instruments follows the same contour as the steering wheel. This ensures the driver an unobstructed view of the comprehensive analog dash. The remainder of the primary driving controls are well placed and easily operated, although some will find the radio placement at the extremity of their reach. I still find the dash vents rather ugly, no matter how functional Toyota insist they are. The front seats are generally comfortable and provide plenty of lateral support thanks to the large side bolsters. I say generally because I found the curvature of the seat back a little too pronounced for my frame. Complementing the driving position is a very well-placed dead pedal. The Paseo is described as a 2+2. Now the +2 portion, while it offers a reasonable amount of legroom and certainly plenty of hip room, there's zero headroom because of the very sharp rake of the rear window. At the heart of the Paseo is a totally new 1.5-litre 16-valve twin-cam engine that produces 100 horsepower and 91 pounds-feet of torque. The nice thing about the new engine is its willingness to rev to the red line. This and the fact that the smooth shifting 5-speed will pull almost 100 kilometers an hour in second gear gives the car a very sprightly feel. On the skid pad we turned in acceleration times of just over 9 seconds, which is respectable to say the least. The suspension features independent McPherson struts complete with a stabilizer bar up front and a torsion beam in the rear. In the pylon test, the Paseo tracked a fairly true line with only modest body roll and minimal understeer. The limiting factor here was the fact that I could beat the power steering fairly easily. In the real world, this does not affect the handling characteristics unless you encounter an obstacle you must avoid in a hurry. The brake system is of the front disc rear drum variety. In the brake test I found the pedal easy to modulate. This means the threshold is easy to find and so you can derive the very best from the brakes without locking them up prematurely. One thing that did bother me though was that both vehicles tested displayed a small amount of brake chatter when stopping from higher speed. My pet peeve on the Paseo has to do with rearward visibility. Now the size and chunky nature of these pillars tends to limit your field of vision. Now to the scoreboard for a rundown on the 1992 Toyota Paseo. The Paseo's new 100-horse 1.5-litre engine provided very good throttle response and quick acceleration, averaging just over 9 seconds to race to the 100k mark. Perhaps the most endearing feature though is its very free revving nature. This makes the car easy to drive under just about any circumstance. Despite the comment about the power steering, the Paseo fared rather well in the pylon test. Body roll is kept to an acceptable amount, yet the suspension proved to be compliant and comfortable, a trait sure to please many customers. The power-assisted disc drum setup provided straight fade-free stops that averaged 122 feet from 80 kilometers an hour. Combine this with a pedal feel that is easy to modulate and you have one of the better non-ABS systems available on a small car. The supportive seats and supple suspension provide a high degree of comfort for the front passengers. As with most multi-valve engines, it made the occupants aware of when it was working hard. Wind noise and tyre noise were minimal. Given the performance, the average fuel economy of 8 litres per 100 kilometres or 35 miles per gallon for the manual and 9.1 litres per 100 kilometres or 31 miles per gallon returned by the automatic is reasonably good. In conclusion, the Paseo is sure to appeal to the growing number of consumers seeking a sporty car that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. The performance and ride are well balanced, managing to stay on the right side of the fine line that separates the good from the bad.
Now, the first thing you'll notice when you visit the home of Bob Sparks are the Volkswagens, all sorts of Volkswagens. And if you're like me and you cut your driving teeth on a Volkswagen, you are going to die for what I'm about to show you. Have a look at it. A 1970 Bug, 800 original miles, and the proud owner is right here, Bob Sparks. And Bob, I count about 7 cars in your driveway right now. I want to talk about this Bug, but tell me about how many cars you do indeed own.
Well, we have basically somewhere around 50 cars altogether.
And
mostly Volkswagen, some parts cars, some to be restored, and some in reasonably good condition.
Why Volkswagen?
Well, the simplicity of the vehicle is something that I feel that it's most important to me. Maintenance is low and appreciation is worldwide, and basically the car is it's an all-time winner.
Over 50 cars, but I get the feeling this Bug right beside us now is very special. Tell me why it's so special.
This one is sort of an unusual car. It was, first of all, I've been looking for a car in that color for about 9 years and finally found this one in Michigan at a Bug show. To have a car that's over 20 years old and have less than 1,000 miles on it, it's unbelievable. And so basically it was the right color, it was the right car, and I felt that I should rescue it from daily driving.
What do you think it was worth in 1970, and maybe more importantly, what's it worth today?
In 1970, probably the car would be worth somewhere around $3,600, maybe $3,800. Now it's been appraised by Fawcett 2 years ago for $33,000, and I was offered $40,000 for it.
Still with Volkswagen, something here called the Thing?
Yes, for a better name. Called the Thing because they just couldn't figure out anything to call it, and because it has ties with the First World War, is called Kuba wagon. I understand that most of the dealers received 2 per dealership in 73 and 4. This one here came in from Prince Edward Island.
Well, Bob, thank you, but stick around because later Bob's going to come back and show us another car that's not a Volkswagen, but certainly has a VW tie-in. And you know, Volkswagen, especially the early generations, were all air-cooled, so you didn't have to worry about springing a leak in your radiator. But most cars today, of course, do have radiators. And with that in mind, we're now going to join our resident mechanic, Bill Gardner. Bill's going to give us some tips on looking after your rad.
Now, it's come to my attention that a lot of folks aren't familiar with what constitutes a good radiator. And of course, the radiator is the heart of your vehicle's cooling system. It's something that should be inspected periodically, and certainly before any hot weather or any strenuous driving like trailer pulling or long highway runs that you're about to embark on. For example, a lot of Canadians head south in the wintertime, and they may have been limping through a Canadian winter with a kind of a shaky radiator, and all of a sudden they're going to do 1,500 miles in some extremely high temperatures. So it's important that we make an inspection of that radiator. Now, as you can see on this minivan, we really can't see the radiator. So on a vehicle like this, the first thing you would probably want to do would be remove the radiator in order to make a proper inspection, or have a skilled mechanic have a look at it. Now on some vehicles though, the rad is quite accessible, and in many cases an owner could make his own assessment. We can see a radiator that's complete right here. This is out of a small car, of course. It has the tanks and headers still on it. You can see the spigots that the rad hose is attached to, and the 2 ports for the automatic transmission cooler that's integral with this radiator. Now that rad's still in pretty good shape. We've also got a couple of rad cores here that have failed, and we want to show you what the defects are. Now of course this one's pretty visual. You can see that the fins have completely disintegrated and fallen out in this area. The rad just looks like a skeleton. But the average owner could make an inspection of his radiator just by using a stick pen, putting it in the loops of the cooling fins and trying to wiggle them. That will tell us if the radiator has loose fin bonding, and that's one very important criteria for a good radiator. The fins must be tightly bonded to these rows of tubes. Now we can see on this other radiator core over here that the fins look fairly decent in most of the rad. Now up here they're kind of disintegrating, but out in the middle of the radiator they don't look too bad. But when we turn it around, we've removed the tank where the rad hoses go on, and you can see that it's clogged up with calcium. Now the other end is really clogged, and as a matter of fact, it's completely blocked. There's almost no coolant flow through this radiator. It's blocked with calcium, and that's something that would have been, may have been preventable by changing the antifreeze a little bit more often. Now as we move over to this Mustang, we can see that this is a car with a very accessible radiator. It's easy to get at, so we could make a quick visual inspection. We could use that pen again in the loops of the cooling fins, trying to see if our bonding is good. And if we want to see inside the radiator, we're going to have to drain the coolant down. When we look in the fill neck of the radiator, all we can see right now is the green coolant. So we'd want to drain that coolant into a pan and then get a flashlight and peer into the radiator core tubes to see if they're blocked with that calcium, as we showed you in that other rad. That's an important inspection anybody can make. We also want to go around to the front of the radiator and make sure that it's not clogged with mud, leaves, or other debris that's been picked up off the road. If it has, we should wash that or clean that area off before we embark on any highway trips. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 91.
I'm back with Bob Sparks looking at his collection of Volkswagens. But Bob, I'm no expert, but that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.
No, it's a 1981 Puma. It is a Volkswagen chassis and power plant, and that's the reason I kind of tied in with them. And also has a fiberglass body built in Brazil. It was imported here by Lada in 81 and 82 in a small amount. And basically it's a little sporty car that won't rust and looks good, and reasonable performance for Volkswagen, very dependable.
Well, as you mentioned, this car was imported and distributed in the 80s by Lada, which makes you ask the question, whatever happened to Lada, this car that was built, assembled, and exported by Russia? Well, let's try and find out.
The Lada made its Canadian debut in 1978. 13 years later, over 60,000 Canadians own one. Today, Lada has 7 new models and new hope for future growth.
Since perestroika and improved relationships with both the Canadian government and the Soviet government, and also the U.S. government, which is fairly strong in impacting upon our attitudes in Canada also, have improved. And right now we're seeing a very strong surge back towards Soviet products, and in particular towards Lada products.
Well, we started selling Lada actually in 1990. We were looking for a wider base for our dealership, and we thought that the Lada would be a good addition. It's an inexpensive car, a very good car. The new models are well designed. The engine is a Porsche designed engine, and we just felt that it would be a good addition. There was a lot of anti-Russian feeling, which I think has disappeared over the last 2 or 3 years. But the car, there's a lot of them still on the road, the original models, a lot of them still on the road. We have actually 3 different models. We've got the 1300, which you can buy for $53.95, and we have the 1500, which goes up to $59.95. And we have the 4x4, which you can buy on the road for $11,000, the most inexpensive 4x4 in the market.
A vehicle that parks itself? Seeing is believing when it comes to the Volkswagen Futura. Thanks to four-wheel omnidirectional steering, the Futura needs just 20 centimeters clearance front and rear to accomplish the feat. Still in the concept stage, the Futura is guided by sensors, 5 in the front, 5 in the rear, and 4 on each side. All the driver has to do is push a button on the dash and stand back.
It's a lot of fancy technology in that engine, but 200 miles per gallon? No way. That's coming up next on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
We've all heard the stories about the 200 mile per gallon carburetor and how the inventor was murdered by spies from the oil industry. Yeah, right. As if General Motors doesn't have spies? You don't think that General Motors would have a 200 mile per gallon carburetor if they could get one? Car makers all over the world are under tremendous pressure from governments, from the marketplace, to improve the fuel efficiency of their automobiles. If they could get 200 mile per gallon out of their cars, believe me, they'd do it. Now, I have not tested every fuel ionizer, magnetic resonance induction device, water injection system, and miracle spark plug on the market. But I have tried some of them, and about the best you can say is the best of them do no harm. But at worst, some of these things can ruin your engine. Now, I have driven a car with a water injection system. This particular system is being evaluated by the Ontario government as we speak to see if its inventor's claims of 50% more fuel efficiency are in fact correct. However, if these things are not working properly, they can fill your cylinders full of water, and the next time you try and start your car, the engine's attempt to act as a hydraulic pump will turn your connecting rods into pretzels. You see, car companies have to worry about that too. It's not just a matter of getting a peak reading of 75 miles per gallon. The thing has to live in the hands of the real customers. Now, there are things you can do to improve fuel efficiency. Keep your engine in good tune, keep your tires inflated to the maximum pressure allowed, combine a lot of short trips into one longer trip. That's much better for fuel economy. But folks, let's leave the car engineering to the car manufacturers. I'm Jim Kenzie. Well, I finally got my chance to drive one of my favorite all-time cars, the Volkswagen Bug. But there is a catch. You see, when the Volkswagen is this one, owned by Bob Sparks, and it has 800 original miles, you don't get to drive very far. But what the heck, I'll take what I can get. We'll see you next week. I'm coming, Bob. Right in the garage there. I don't know if I can get in the second gear. I guess not.
Motoring 91 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.